The leather folder sat on the table in front of me. It looked ordinary, but to me, it felt as heavy as a beating heart. Inside were legal papers that would change my life forever. It was my 21st birthday, and my grandmother had just given me the greatest gift anyone could imagine, a luxury hotel worth nearly $50 million. The ownership papers carried only one name. Mine. For a moment, I couldn't even think. I stared at the documents, trying to understand what had just happened. The hotel, the business, the future, it all belonged to me now. Then the front door opened. The sound echoed through the house and broke the silence. I looked up and immediately saw my mother, Brenda, walking inside. Behind her was her husband, Scott Miller. The smile on my mother's face looked warm, but I knew better. It was the kind of smile she used when she wanted something. "Well," she said cheerfully, taking off her coat, "this is wonderful news. We should manage the hotel together as a family." I stared at her. For a second, I wondered if she was joking. She wasn't. I slowly closed the folder and looked directly into her eyes. "Absolutely not," I said. "The hotel belongs to me." The smile disappeared from her face. "What do you mean?" she asked sharply. "I mean exactly what I said. Grandma gave it to me. I'm the owner now." The room suddenly felt colder. Scott crossed his arms and exchanged a glance with my mother. Then Brenda's expression hardened. "If that's how you want to play this," she snapped, "then maybe it's time for you to pack your bags and leave this house." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move. Because there was something they didn't know. Something neither of them expected. That night wasn't about their demands. It wasn't about their threats. And it definitely wasn't about who thought they deserved the hotel. It was about my grandmother's next move. A move so carefully planned that it would bring their entire little act crashing down. At the time, though, they had no idea. Neither did I. When people see me today, they notice the success. They see the luxury hotel standing proudly in the center of town. They see the shining marble floors, the elegant glass entrance, and the gold letters above the building displaying the Bennett name. People assume life has always been easy for me. They couldn't be more wrong. What they don't see is the chaos that once lived inside my family. The arguments. The disappointment. The secrets. And the years spent watching people choose money over love. The story really begins with my grandmother, Sharon Bennett. She was only 21 years old when she bought a small roadside motel in Vermont. Everyone thought she was making a terrible mistake. Friends told her she was too young. Banks doubted her. Business owners laughed at her. But Grandma never listened to people who only talked about limits. She worked day and night. She cleaned rooms herself. She greeted guests. She fixed broken furniture. She learned every part of the business from the ground up. Slowly, that tiny motel became successful. Then she bought another property. And another. And another. Years later, the Bennett Collection became one of the most respected hotel groups in the region. People who once laughed at her now spoke her name with admiration. Some even spoke it with envy. But Grandma never changed. She remained hardworking, practical, and focused. My mother, however, was very different. Brenda inherited Grandma's confidence, but not her patience. She loved attention. She loved expensive parties. She loved cameras. Most of all, she loved being seen as successful. To her, appearances mattered more than hard work. She wanted people to admire her, whether she had earned it or not. My father, Mark, was the complete opposite. He was calm, honest, and dependable. While my mother chased recognition, my father quietly handled the difficult work behind the scenes. For years, he managed operations across several properties. Employees respected him. Guests trusted him. And Grandma appreciated him. He wasn't flashy. He simply got things done. As a child, I thought my parents balanced each other. Then everything fell apart. I was 16 when I watched my family break apart. I still remember that night. Dad stood near the front door with a suitcase beside him. His face looked exhausted. Not angry. Not bitter. Just tired. like someone who had spent years fighting a battle he could no longer win. "I can't stay here anymore," he said quietly. The words hurt more than I expected. My mother stood across the room with her arms folded. Neither of them shouted. There were no dramatic scenes. Just silence. A painful silence that seemed to fill every corner of the house. When Dad walked out the door, it felt like part of our family left with him. And somehow, it never came back. A few months later, my mother met Scott Miller. At first glance, Scott looked successful. He wore expensive suits. He drove luxury cars. He spoke confidently in every conversation. Words like expansion, strategy, and global opportunities seemed to come out of his mouth every 5 minutes. My mother was impressed immediately. Grandma wasn't. Neither was I. There was something about him that felt fake. Like a beautifully wrapped gift box with nothing inside. Not long after their marriage, my mother announced that I would be moving in with Grandma. She claimed it would provide stability. She claimed it would be better for my future. Maybe part of that was true. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I was becoming an inconvenience. A reminder of the family she had left behind. One less witness to the choices she was making. Living with Grandma changed everything. Her house was peaceful. Every morning smelled like fresh coffee and cedar wood. She woke up early and started working before sunrise. Even in her later years, she never stopped learning or planning. She treated me differently than most adults treated teenagers. She didn't see me as a child. She saw potential. She taught me how businesses worked. She taught me about investments. She taught me how to read contracts and understand people. Most importantly, she taught me that true success wasn't measured by money. It was measured by character. At night, I would often find her sitting at her desk, studying old property maps and business plans. Sometimes she would run her fingers across the faded sketches she had drawn decades earlier. Then she would smile. "Every building tells a story, Sophia," she would say. "The walls remember who built them and why." At the time, I thought she was talking about hotels. Years later, I realized she was talking about people. The choices we make. The values we build our lives on. The foundations nobody can see. As the years passed, my relationship with my mother became weaker. Her phone calls grew shorter. Her interest in my life seemed smaller. Whenever she called, the conversation somehow turned back to business. "You should come visit," she'd say. "Scott has some exciting ideas about expanding into Europe." I would politely refuse. Usually, I had exams, projects, deadlines, or sometimes I simply didn't want to go. We had become strangers connected only by blood. Then my 21st birthday arrived. That morning, Grandma asked me to join her in her office. The leather folder sat waiting on her desk. I had never seen it before. She placed it in front of me. Her expression was serious. "This is your inheritance," she said softly. I blinked in surprise. "My inheritance?" She nodded. "But it's also your test." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Not yet. I opened the folder and saw the ownership documents. The hotel. The shares. The legal transfer. Everything. My hands shook. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The future I had dreamed about was suddenly real. But Grandma's words stayed in my mind. "Your test." What kind of test? I would find out sooner than expected. Because sometimes the moment you receive everything you've ever wanted is also the moment you discover who is waiting to take it away. That evening, we celebrated my birthday together. The dining room glowed with candlelight. A roasted lamb sat in the center of the table. Soft music played in the background. Grandma seemed genuinely happy. For the first time in a long while, everything felt peaceful. I remember thinking maybe life was finally settling down. Maybe the difficult years were behind us. Then the doorbell rang. A simple sound. Yet it changed everything. I stood and walked toward the door. The cool evening air rushed inside when I opened it. Then I smelled her perfume. My mother stood there wearing an expensive cream-colored coat. Her perfectly styled hair framed a bright smile that looked more practiced than genuine. Beside her stood Scott. His confident grin appeared exactly as I remembered. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mother said. Her voice overflowed with sweetness. We were nearby and thought we'd stop in. I knew immediately that wasn't true. People like Brenda and Scott never arrived without a reason. Behind me, I heard Grandma slowly push back her chair. Neither of them waited for an invitation. They simply walked inside. Scott carried a shiny gift bag. The kind people bring when they expect something much bigger in return. As they entered the dining room, my mother's eyes moved around the room. Then they stopped. Directly on the leather folder sitting on the table. The inheritance. The hotel. The future. And suddenly, I realized exactly why they were here. My mother's eyes stayed locked on the leather folder. The way she looked at it made my stomach tighten. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't pride. It was hunger. "We heard about your big birthday gift," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness that felt completely fake. $50 million. That's incredible. Scott gave an approving nod beside her. "What an amazing opportunity," he added. I forced a polite smile. "It's not really about the money," I said. "Grandma gave it to me because she wants me to continue what she built." Mom laughed softly. The sound felt sharp. "Of course, sweetheart. That's wonderful." She waved her perfectly manicured hand through the air. "But running a company that large isn't exactly simple." I stayed quiet. She continued. "You're only 21. You don't have the experience needed to manage hotels, employees, contracts, and investors. That's why Scott and I were thinking." She exchanged a quick glance with her husband. "That we could help manage everything. As a family." The word family hit me harder than it should have. For years, family had only appeared when something valuable was involved. Scott stepped closer. His smile looked friendly, but his eyes told a different story. "Sophia, this is a huge responsibility," he said. "One person can't handle all of it alone. Let us help. We've already started drafting a management proposal." Before I could answer, Grandma spoke. "A proposal?" Her calm voice cut through the room like a knife. Scott's smile immediately weakened. Grandma slowly set down her fork. "A proposal for something that doesn't belong to either of you." The atmosphere changed instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody smiled. Mom's expression tightened. "Mother," she said carefully, "let's not make this difficult. We're only trying to be practical." Grandma leaned back in her chair. "Practical." She repeated the word slowly, as if testing its taste. Then she looked directly at my mother. "Like when you mortgaged the Burlington property without permission." Mom froze. The color drained from her face. "Or perhaps," Grandma continued calmly, "like when you disappeared for 6 months claiming you were expanding the business, only to return with debt and unpaid loans." The room became silent. Even Scott looked uncomfortable. "That happened years ago," Mom said quickly. "Yes," Grandma replied. Her voice remained soft. "But I remember every year it cost me." Nobody spoke. The smell of roasted rosemary filled the dining room, but suddenly it mixed with something else. Anger. Old anger. The kind that never completely disappears. I stood frozen, feeling trapped between them. My mother finally turned toward me. Her expression changed instantly. The anger vanished. The smile returned. "Sophia," she said gently, "please don't let her turn you against me." I stared at her. Against her. The words felt backwards. "We're family," she continued. "We've made mistakes, but families work through things. We can rebuild what we've lost." For a moment, part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted the relationship we never had. Part of me wanted a mother who actually cared. But then her eyes drifted toward the folder again. Just for a second. That was enough. The truth was sitting right there. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about rebuilding anything. This was about control. About ownership. About getting back something she believed should belong to her. Grandma slowly stood up from her chair. She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Dinner is over," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Some subjects are not open for discussion. Scott cleared his throat. The forced smile returned to his face. Of course, he said. We understand. But I could tell he didn't. Neither of them did. They weren't used to hearing the word no. A few minutes later, they headed toward the door. Mom paused before leaving. She looked at me one last time. The smile was gone now. Only cold frustration remained. Then she leaned closer. Just enough for me to hear. This isn't over. The words were barely a whisper, but they carried more threat than a shout. Then she walked away. The front door closed behind them. The house became quiet again. Yet somehow the silence felt different. Heavier. Like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. And deep down, I knew she was right. It wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. The house looked exactly the same. The same walls. The same furniture. The same sunlight shining through the windows. But something felt different. The warmth was gone. The air felt colder somehow. As if the house itself sensed trouble coming. Grandma spent most of the morning in her study. The door remained closed. From downstairs, I could hear the steady clicking of her typewriter. The familiar sound usually comforted me. Today it only made me nervous. I walked into the kitchen expecting an empty room. Instead, I stopped in the doorway. My mother was sitting at the breakfast table. A cup of coffee rested beside her. No one had offered it. She had simply helped herself. In front of her sat one of Grandma's old financial ledgers. She flipped through the pages as casually as if she already owned them. Across the room, Scott paced near the window with his phone pressed against his ear. His voice was low, but not low enough. I caught pieces of the conversation. Restructuring. Joint management. Control of assets. The words made my skin crawl. Neither of them noticed me standing there. For a few seconds, I simply watched. They looked like strangers pretending to belong. Like intruders hiding behind the title of family. Finally, Mom looked up. Oh, good morning, sweetheart. Her smile appeared instantly. Perfect. Practiced. Fake. We were just discussing ways to keep the business stable. I raised an eyebrow. Stable. Exactly. I leaned against the counter. The company has been stable for 50 years. Her smile twitched. Scott quickly stepped in. What your mother means is that businesses face challenges. New leadership can create uncertainty. I poured myself a glass of orange juice. Slowly. Carefully. Giving neither of them the reaction they wanted. Mom folded her hands. Sophia, you're young. You should be enjoying life. I said nothing. You have your studies. Your friends. Your future. She paused. You shouldn't be worrying about payrolls, legal paperwork, employee management, or investors. Scott nodded eagerly. Exactly. Let us handle the difficult parts. The boring parts, Mom added. You focus on your education. I took a sip of juice. Then another. The silence stretched longer and longer. Soon it became uncomfortable. Exactly as I intended. Finally, I looked at them. Does Grandma know you're here? Mom blinked. Her smile disappeared. She's resting. Really? Yes. I nodded slowly. Then maybe you should let her. Neither of them answered. I set down my glass and walked out. I could feel their eyes following me the entire way. Every step felt like a challenge. And every second made it clearer. They weren't going to stop. Not until they got what they wanted. That afternoon, I knocked on Grandma's office door. Come in. I entered and found her sitting behind her desk. Stacks of documents covered the surface. She looked up as I walked in. For some reason, she didn't seem surprised when I told her about breakfast. She simply sighed. A tired sigh. The kind that comes from years of disappointment. I was hoping they'd at least wait a week, she said. I sat down across from her. Do you want me to call the lawyer? A faint smile appeared. Already done. That answer didn't surprise me. Grandma was always 3 steps ahead. She opened a drawer and removed another leather folder. It looked almost identical to mine. But this one seemed heavier. More serious. She placed it on the desk between us. There are things you don't know about your mother and Scott. My stomach tightened immediately. What kind of things? Financial records. She opened the folder. Private agreements. More papers appeared. Hidden transactions. My heart started beating faster. I looked at her. Why didn't you tell me before? Grandma closed the folder and met my eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she spoke quietly. Because some lessons can't be taught through words. I waited. The only way to learn how to protect something valuable, she continued, is to understand how easily someone can take it away. The room became silent. For the first time, I realized this wasn't simply about inheritance. It was a test. A test of judgment. A test of strength. A test of whether I deserved everything she had built. And judging by the determination in Grandma's eyes, the real battle was only beginning. The rest of that day passed quietly. We reviewed documents. We organized records. We prepared for what was coming. Outside, the sun slowly disappeared beyond the trees. Inside, Grandma and I worked late into the evening. And with every paper I read, one thing became clearer. My mother and Scott weren't planning to ask for control. They were planning to take it. The only question was whether they realized Grandma had already prepared for their every move. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The heavy kind. The kind that settles over a house before a storm. Grandma sat in her study with her attorney on speakerphone. I could hear pieces of the conversation through the half-open door, legal terms, account numbers, dates, signatures. Every word seemed to reveal another secret. Meanwhile, I sat at the dining room table surrounded by stacks of old files and financial records. At first, the papers looked confusing. Just numbers. Transfers. Bank statements. Contracts. But the longer I looked, the more patterns appeared. Money had been moved between accounts for no clear reason. Large payments disappeared without explanation. There were transfers to companies that barely existed. Some accounts didn't seem connected to any real business at all. Ghost accounts. Shell companies. Fake projects. The evidence was everywhere. And almost every trail led back to 2 names. Brenda Bennett. Scott Miller. By sunset, the dining room looked like a war room. Documents covered nearly every surface. The house smelled of coffee, old paper, and determination. I rubbed my tired eyes and looked toward Grandma. She looked exhausted. But she didn't look worried. In fact, she seemed calmer than she had all week. As if she had finally reached the moment she had been preparing for. She carefully closed a folder and looked at me. "Tomorrow night," she said quietly, "we invite them back for dinner." I blinked. After everything. A faint smile touched her lips. Especially after everything. I understood immediately. She wasn't inviting them back to negotiate. She was inviting them back to reveal themselves. To let them walk into a trap they would never see coming. "Let them think they've won," she said. I nodded. If they wanted a stage, we'd give them one. But this time, we would be writing the script. The invitation went out the next morning. Short. Polite. Perfectly harmless. "Dinner tonight. Let's discuss the transition properly." I watched Grandma type every word herself. Her fingers moved slowly across the keyboard. Every sentence was carefully chosen. Every word was bait. And my mother would never be able to resist it. By 6 o'clock that evening, everything was ready. The long oak table shined under the dining room lights. Candles stood waiting to be lit. Crystal glasses sparkled. Silverware sat perfectly aligned. To anyone else, it looked like a family dinner. To me, it looked like a courtroom. And tonight, judgment was coming. The smell of roasted garlic drifted through the house. Soft music played in the background. Yet beneath the calm atmosphere, tension waited like a loaded spring. Grandma had changed into a dark navy dress. I recognized it immediately. She only wore it during important business meetings, major negotiations, critical decisions. The dress was practically armor. As she adjusted a candle near the center of the table, she leaned toward me. "Stay calm," she whispered. Then she placed a silver folder beside my plate. My stomach tightened. "Let them do the talking first." I nodded. Grandma smiled. A small smile. The kind people mistake for kindness when it's actually confidence. Asterisk 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 at exactly 7 o'clock, headlights swept across the driveway. Right on time. Of course. The front door opened moments later. No knock. No hesitation. Just entitlement. My mother entered first. The sharp click of her high heels echoed through the hallway. She wore a bright red dress. Bold. Expensive. Attention-grabbing. The color of someone who wanted control. Scott followed close behind. His tie was slightly loosened. His grin looked wider than usual. Like a man already celebrating a victory. "Mother," Mom said warmly, leaning forward to air-kiss Grandma's cheek. Then she turned toward me. "Sophia." Her voice sounded sweet, but underneath it was something sharp. Something dangerous. Glass wrapped in velvet. "I'm glad we're finally discussing this properly." Scott pulled out a chair. Family decisions deserve transparency. I nearly laughed. Transparency. Coming from the two people hiding the most secrets. The irony was almost painful. Dinner began. At first, everything appeared normal. Food was served. Wine was poured. Small talk floated around the table. But nobody was really focused on dinner. Everyone was waiting. Waiting for the real conversation. I noticed Mom tapping her fingers against the table. A nervous habit. Scott kept glancing toward the silver folder beside me. His attention returned to it again and again. Like a treasure chest he couldn't wait to open. Finally, my mother broke. She set down her fork and folded her hands. "Let's be honest," she said. "There are important decisions that need to be made." Nobody interrupted. Encouraged, she continued. "Managing a business this large is extremely complicated. Hotels, employees, investments, legal obligations. It's unrealistic to expect a 21-year-old to handle everything alone." Grandma calmly sipped her wine. She said nothing. Scott immediately stepped in. "We've spent considerable time developing a management strategy." His voice carried the confidence of someone who thought he was the smartest person in the room. "I would oversee financial optimization." Mom nodded. "I would handle public relations and brand development." Then Scott smiled at me. "And Sophia could work alongside us for a while. Learn the business gradually." The words sounded friendly. But they weren't a suggestion. They were instructions. A plan where they held the power. And I held the title. Nothing more. I slowly placed my fork down. The soft sound echoed across the table. The room became quiet. "You mean," I said carefully, "I would sign ownership over to both of you, and then you'd run everything?" Scott's smile flickered. "Just for a second." Mom answered quickly. "Not ownership." The hesitation told me everything. Management authority. Temporary authority. Shared responsibility. Different words. Same goal. Control. Grandma finally looked up. Her eyes were impossible to read. "And how exactly," she asked calmly, "would this benefit Sophia?" Mom smiled immediately. "It benefits all of us." There it was again. The word she always used when she wanted something. Family. I hated how easily it left her mouth. Family wasn't a tool. It wasn't a business strategy. And it certainly wasn't an excuse. I took a slow breath. Then I nodded. "You're right." Mom relaxed instantly. A satisfied smile appeared. "Good," she said. "I knew you'd understand." But I wasn't finished. "You're right," I repeated. "We are family." She leaned back confidently. Scott did the same. They thought they had one. Then I continued. Which is exactly why we should stop pretending this conversation is about love. The smile disappeared from my mother's face. Instantly, the room became silent. I slowly pushed the silver folder toward the center of the table. You wanted transparency. I looked at both of them. Let's start with that. Scott immediately reached toward the folder. But Grandma's hand moved first. She opened it herself. Paper slid across the table. The sound seemed unusually loud. Final. Unavoidable. Grandma pulled out the first document. These, she said calmly, are bank statements from the Burlington property account. She placed them in front of my mother. Funds withdrawn under Brenda Bennett's authorization. Mom stared down at the pages. Her face lost color. The confidence vanished. Money that never returned to the company. Mother, she said quickly, that's ridiculous. Grandma ignored her. She removed another set of papers. And these are emails connected to Mr. Miller's consulting firm. Scott stiffened. The smile disappeared from his face. The room suddenly felt smaller. Grandma continued reading. Business proposals involving overseas expansion projects that never existed. Another document landed on the table. Signed by both of you. Scott's jaw tightened. You had no right to access those records. Grandma looked directly at him. For the first time that evening, her voice became cold. I had every right. The words struck like a hammer. You attempted to move company assets through shell corporations. Another document appeared. You attempted to mortgage core hotel properties without board approval. Another document. You assumed I wasn't paying attention. The fire crackled quietly in the fireplace. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence felt enormous. My mother's eyes suddenly found mine. Desperation replaced confidence. Sophia, she said. Her voice shook. This isn't true. I said nothing. She's twisting everything. Still, I remained silent. Because for the first time, the evidence was sitting right in front of us. And evidence doesn't care about excuses. Grandma reached into the folder one final time. Then she removed a single document. The most important one. She slid it across the table. Slowly. Deliberately. The paper stopped directly in front of my mother. Grandma folded her hands. The ownership amendment. The room froze. Effective immediately, all authority, voting power, and operational control transfer solely to Sophia Bennett. Mom stared at the page. Scott stared at the page. Neither of them breathed. Neither of them spoke. Grandma's next words shattered whatever hope they still had. You are both officially removed from every board position, advisory role, trust agreement, and decision-making authority connected to the Bennett collection. The color drained from my mother's face. She looked down at the document as if it might burst into flames. For the first time in years, she wasn't the person controlling the room. She wasn't the person holding the power. And deep down, she knew it. The game she thought she was winning had ended before it ever began. You can't do this. My mother's voice came out as little more than a whisper. The confidence she had carried into the room was gone. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the document spread across the table. For the first time all evening, she looked afraid. Grandma didn't flinch. She remained seated, calm and composed, her hands folded neatly in front of her. I already have, she replied quietly. The room fell silent. A heavy silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the crackling fire in the fireplace seemed to fade into the background. Then everything exploded. My mother shot to her feet so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is insane, she shouted. Her voice cracked with anger. This company is my legacy. My future. My entire life. She pointed at the papers. You can't just hand everything to her. Grandma slowly looked up. Her expression never changed. No, Brenda, she said calmly. You handed it away yourself years ago. The words hit harder than any scream. My mother's face twisted with disbelief. Scott immediately stood and grabbed her arm. "Let's go," he muttered. His confidence had disappeared too. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked nervous. But my mother wasn't ready to leave. "Not yet." "No," she shouted. She pulled her arm away and pointed directly at me. Her eyes burned with rage. "You think you've won?" The room went still. I met her stare without looking away. "You're just a child," she continued. "A kid pretending to be an executive." Her voice grew louder. "You have no idea what you're doing." Nobody interrupted her. "You'll drown in paperwork." She took a step closer. "You'll make mistakes." Another step. "The company will fall apart before the end of the year." I stood slowly. My heart was pounding. But my voice stayed calm. "Maybe." The single word surprised her. I shrugged slightly. "Maybe I'll make mistakes." She blinked. "Maybe I'll struggle." The room remained silent. "But if that happens, it'll be my mistake." I looked directly at her. My responsibility. My future. And my company. For a second, she couldn't speak. Her mouth opened. Then closed again. Her anger was no longer hiding something else. Humiliation. The realization that she had lost. Finally, she found her voice. The words came out sharp and bitter. "Then pack your bags and leave this house." The exact same threat she had thrown at me days earlier. But this time it sounded different. Smaller. Weaker. Desperate. And that's when Grandma laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. Just a soft, knowing laugh. The kind that comes from someone who already knows the ending. My mother froze. Grandma smiled faintly. "You're right, Brenda." The room held its breath. "Someone is leaving this house tonight." She paused. "But it won't be Sophia." For a moment, nobody moved. Even the fire seemed frozen. Then Grandma calmly reached into her purse. She removed a large sealed envelope. Without a word, she placed it on the table. Directly in front of my mother. The sound echoed through the room. Mom stared at it. "What is that?" Grandma's eyes never left hers. "A court order." The color drained from both their faces. Scott took a step backward. My mother slowly opened the envelope. Her hands shook. Inside were legal documents. Official documents. Documents neither of them expected to see. Grandma's voice remained calm. "You've both been formally served." Nobody breathed. "For fraud." Another pause. "For embezzlement." Another. "And conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The room seemed to tilt. Scott's face turned completely pale. "You called the police." His voice barely worked. Grandma shook her head. "No." She looked directly at him. "I called justice." The words landed like stones. My mother staggered backward. She shook her head repeatedly. "No." Her voice broke. "No, no, no." Tears filled her eyes. "You wouldn't do this." Grandma remained silent. My mother took another step forward. "I'm your daughter." For the first time all evening, sadness crossed Grandma's face. Real sadness. The kind that comes from losing someone long before they actually leave. "No, Brenda." Her voice softened. "You were my daughter." The room became still again. Then she continued. "Until you traded this family's name for power." Her eyes glistened. "Until you chose greed over integrity." A tear rolled down my mother's cheek. But Grandma wasn't finished. "Until you forgot who you were." The front door opened. Everyone turned. 2 investigators entered quietly. Behind them stood uniformed officers. Professional. Respectful. Final. The reality of the situation suddenly became impossible to deny. Scott lowered his head. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He didn't make excuses. For once, he had nothing to say. The officers approached him. A moment later, they escorted him toward the door. He never looked back. My mother followed more slowly. Her breathing was uneven. Her eyes were red. lost, confused, broken. As she reached the doorway, she turned toward us one last time. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. I thought maybe she would finally admit what she had done. But she didn't. She simply stared. Then she walked away. The door closed behind her, and silence returned to the house. But this silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't painful. It felt clean, like opening a window after years of stale air. I slowly sat back down. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. The adrenaline was finally fading. Grandma reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her touch was warm, steady. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." I swallowed hard, then shook my head. "No." My voice was barely above a whisper. "I needed to." She nodded slowly. Her eyes looked tired, but strong, stronger than ever. "You handled yourself better than I did at your age." I glanced around the dining room. The half-empty glasses, the folded napkins, the abandoned plates, the battlefield after the storm. "Do you think she'll ever forgive us?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Grandma sighed. A long, quiet sigh. "Forgiveness requires honesty." The fire crackled softly. Golden light danced across the room. "Your mother still believes she's the victim." I looked down. Part of me wished things had ended differently. Part of me still wanted a mother. But some people spend so much time blaming others that they never see their own reflection. The room fell quiet again. This time peacefully. I walked over to the window. Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the driveway. Scott sat in the back of a police vehicle. My mother stood near the porch. Rain had started falling. Dark streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks. She looked smaller somehow. Not powerful. Not important. Just alone. I expected to feel victory. I expected relief. Instead, I felt sadness. A deep sadness. Not for what happened, but for what could have been. For the family we never became. A few moments later, Grandma joined me. Her reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. "You did well tonight, Sophia." I looked at her. She shook her head gently. "No, you did more than that." Her eyes met mine. "You didn't raise your voice." She squeezed my shoulder. "You raised your value." The words settled deep inside me. Words I knew I would remember forever. Outside, the last police car disappeared down the road. The night seemed to exhale. The fight was over. Finally. There was no celebration. No champagne. No victory speech. Just two women sitting quietly beside a fire. Two generations. Two survivors of the same family wounds. And for the first time in decades, the cycle had finally been broken. The next morning felt almost unreal. Sunlight poured through the windows. The same house. The same furniture. The same walls. Yet everything felt different. Lighter. Peaceful. The leather folder still sat in the center of the dining table. The folder that had changed everything. The folder that had revealed the truth. I found Grandma in the kitchen drinking coffee. She looked years younger. The tension she had carried for so long was gone. Her shoulders seemed lighter. Her smile came easier. As if a burden she had carried for decades had finally been lifted. The news spread quickly. Business circles talked. Lawyers talked. Investors talked. Everyone talked. Scott disappeared shortly after the investigation began. My mother stayed long enough to watch her reputation collapse. One by one, doors closed. Partnerships ended. Friends disappeared. The image she had spent years creating fell apart in a matter of weeks. Not because anyone betrayed her. Because the truth finally caught up. A few days later, my father came to visit. Mark walked into the house carrying the same quiet strength I remembered from childhood. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. Instead, he walked over to Grandma, placed a hand on her shoulder, and simply said, "You did the right thing." Grandma smiled. When Dad looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Pride. Not pity. Not concern. Pride. And somehow that meant more than anything else. Weeks passed. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I completed my final architecture presentation. Graduated at the top of my class. And for the first time, I began planning a future that truly belonged to me. To celebrate, Grandma invited me to the rooftop of the hotel. No reporters. No business partners. No cameras. Just us. The city lights stretched endlessly below. The evening breeze carried the scent of summer. Grandma raised her glass. To new foundations. I smiled. And looking out over the city, I finally understood. This wasn't about rebuilding a company. The company had survived. This was about rebuilding peace. Trust. Freedom. For years, I believed I was living in someone else's shadow. Someone else's legacy. Someone else's story. But standing there that night, I realized something important. I wasn't the ending of Grandma's story. I was the beginning of my own. I used to think inheritance meant money, property, buildings, a last name. Now I know better. Real inheritance is wisdom, strength, boundaries, the courage to walk away from what destroys you, even when it shares your blood. The hotel wasn't the greatest gift Grandma gave me. Freedom was. And that was worth more than $50 million.